territories between Indigenous nations and colonial powers, and other parts were stolen and remain unceded and unsurrendered. Our conference and our host institution benefit from genocide, stolen land, unfulfilled treaty obligations, and continued systematic oppression of Indigenous peoples. As settlers, we must work to resist and dismantle the ongoing colonial system from which we benefit. As allies, we must center Indigenous voices and actions in this work.
As Yiddishists, our diasporic identity and beliefs do not override or displace our settler identities, nor the fact that many of us live, work, and study on stolen land. We must reflect on the ways that our own identity is complicit in colonialism and seek to develop the ways in which our identity might be for us a source of critical anti-colonial action. So we wish to express our gratitude for the opportunity to live, work, study, and host our conference on Turtle Land.
And as we get started, we're now going to introduce our faculty advisor, Professor Anna Shternshis. Professor Shternshis is a professor at the University of Toronto, the director of the Anne Tannenbaum Center for Jewish Studies, and in the Department of Germanic Languages and Literatures. And we are so grateful, Professor Shternshis, to have you here. And we're now going to invite you to introduce our keynote moderator and speakers.
Hi, everyone. I have to say it's one of the rare pleasures to welcome such an amazing cohort of Yiddish graduate students at the University of Toronto. And it doesn't happen every day when a cohort of enthusiastic, brilliant, excellent students arrive to our university. And then next, few months, they organize this huge international conference in Yiddish studies here. It's a great privilege for us to host you and to welcome you. And I cannot be more excited about spending those 2 days of this family weekend with you, listening to our wonderful speakers and learning from you, from keynotes from student participants, and generally being in awe of how wonderful this initiative is. So thank you for inviting me to say those welcoming remarks. I'm very excited to introduce our keynote presenters. Professor Rebecca Margolis is the proud foundation chair of Jewish Civilization at the Australian Centre for Jewish Civilization at Monash University. Her primary area of research is the cultural production of Jewish migrants, and in particular, as it intersects with language continuity. She's, of course, a specialist, the world-leading specialist in Canadian Yiddish culture, Canadian Jewish culture as well. She has published widely on the Jewish experience at the Jewish experience at the intersection of language, literature, theater, film, education, and organizational life. And she's also the author of Jewish Roots, Yiddish culture, on Canadian soils, Yiddish cultural life in Montreal, 1905 to 1945, and also Yiddish Left, Yiddish Lives on Journey of Language Revitalization. Right now, she's working on a new research project called New Yiddish Cinema, which investigates 21st century corpus of film and television with Yiddish, with Yiddish dialogue. And she's also working on study of representation of Yiddish as funny on a screen. Super exciting research, and also really kind of rooted and really promising to make a huge breakthrough in how we make sense of Yiddish in today's world. Right now, she lives in Melbourne and also studying Melbourne. And I cannot wait to hear what Professor Margolis has to say for us today. Now, our second keynote presenter is Dr. Chaya Nove, who is right now a postdoctoral scholar in the linguistics department of the University of California, Berkeley, where she is currently assisting the development of the corpus of spoken Yiddish in Europe and researching post-war European Yiddish dialects. She has earned her PhD in linguistics from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and she's studying sociolinguistics, phonetics, language variation and change, contact linguistics, and bilingualism. Her special interest is the primary research interest in studying Hasidic Yiddish. And I am proud to say that the first talk in Yiddish, as far as I remember, Dr. Nove gave here at the University of Toronto. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you back as a keynote presenter at this conference. And of course, last but definitely not the least, is our moderator, Miriam Schwartz, who is just has been in this department for I want to say 3 years, 2 years, although it feels like it's been wonderful to welcome Miriam here at the University of Toronto. She is a PhD student in the Department of Germanic Languages and Literatures, working in a field of Yiddish studies, a student in collaborative program with Antenbaum Center for Jewish Studies here at the University of Toronto. She has her BA in Jewish literature from University of Tel Aviv, and also MA in Yiddish literature from Tel Aviv University. She right now writes a dissertation on the intersections on the Yiddish and Hebrew literature at the beginning of the 20th century, and deals with questions of translation, orality, and identity. I cannot wait to hear what this panel will bring us. I'm sorry you couldn't see my face, or maybe you could. And thank you again for organizing, and now passing on the virtual microphone to our presenters.
Excellent. So I think we're going to invite Professor Margolis, if you're willing, to be our first speaker.
Hello, everyone. I'm speaking to you from the Bunurong land of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, and that is unceded Aboriginal land. A few words before I begin. I'd like to extend a herzlichen Dank to the organizers of this conference and to everyone joining over Zoom. It's nice to see the names, if not the faces, of former students and colleagues and friends. So it's great to be with you tonight. For me, it's 1 a.m. in Melbourne. It is an honor and pleasure to be co-presenting today's keynote. We are here because Yiddish is at a crossroads. The last generation of traditional European-born speakers will soon no longer be with us. Yiddish among Haredi communities is expanding in scope, while in secular contexts, Yiddish is increasingly the purview of new learners, like a lot of us here today, who are engaging with the language in innovative ways. How do we move forward to carve out heterotopic Yiddish land, which Abigail Wood has defined as, quote, a new kind of vernacular use of Yiddish, aesthetic rather than ethnic or linguistic, embedded among rather than separated from other cultural forms, end quote. Chaya and I decided to call our session Linguistic Innovation at the Intersections because both of us are investigating new linguistic production in Yiddish, but in very different contexts. In a sense, we are working within the polarization model of contemporary Yiddish that Janet Hatta set out some 20 years ago in her oft-cited article, Imagining Yiddish, A Future for the Soul of Ashkenaz, where she remarked upon the widening gap between the Haredim and a highly inclusive, what she called neo-Ashkenaz. However, given the accessibility of the media that both of us discussed today, which are increasingly available online via new media, the two poles are becoming less estranged. I certainly have to agree with Rose Waldman's 2018 article published in Ingeweb, which cautions against a reductionist approach to Haredi culture and argues that we cannot ignore the wealth of new Yiddish culture being produced in Haredi communities when we talk about the state of Yiddish today. Here I would like to add that we must also take into consideration the spoken Yiddish being produced for the screen, which is where massed audiences are most likely to encounter the sounds of the language, scaffolded, of course, by subtitles in another language. This last point is my focus today. In this presentation, I will briefly examine New Yiddish cinema as a site of new and innovative language production. I focus here on live action fiction film as opposed to documentaries and animated films, of which there are many. I interrogate the ways in which Yiddish is produced for the mainstream screen, where Yiddish language dialogue is both created and accessed primarily by non-speakers of the language via a process I call transvernacular translation. Yiddish dialogue is tricky to produce because its largest population of speakers, Haredim, don't go to mainstream movies or become Hollywood directors or independent filmmakers. In the non-Haredi world, it is increasingly challenging to find translators and dialogue coaches, as well as actors with a link to the traditional European-born population of speakers. Rather, the industry increasingly relies on translators from diverse backgrounds and actors with the aptitude to learn the accent and memorize the dialogue. I will share with you now two primary modes of Yiddish dialogue production for the screen, and will offer examples from film and television over the last 2 decades. My objective today is to raise questions about how Yiddish is being transmitted today, and suggest that the screen offers a site for us to integrate Yiddish as part of a process of telling our own stories. While beyond the scope of this presentation, it is worth noting briefly that new media technologies have propelled subtitled Yiddish dialogue onto the screen. When it comes to subtitles, English-speaking audiences of mainstream cinema have moved from extreme reluctance to ready acceptance. As film critic B. Ruby Rich pointed out some 2 decades ago, texting has normalized subtitles. Filmmakers have embedded subtitles into their productions for the purposes of what is called vehicular matching, which is using the language in a context that reality would dictate. For example, a Jew in a shtetl speaking in Yiddish instead of accented English. Streaming and video sharing have forged niche markets and an appetite for foreign language dialogue, including lesser spoken and invented languages. Hits like Fiddler auf dem Dach indicate an appetite for Yiddish language entertainment. All of this has made subtitled Yiddish dialogue on screen far more common over the last 2 decades, especially across 3 forms: prologues to feature films, short scenes in multilingual films, and even a few examples of all Yiddish films. I call this corpus of film and television with dialogue in Yiddish New Yiddish cinema. On these slides, which I will show you in a second, you will see some examples of each category, and I encourage you to view them if you haven't already. I'm just going to share my screen. And you can see here, this is a list. This is just a selection of 10 films that have extensive Yiddish dialogue in them. So I'm referring to not just a film or an episode of television where there's the word schmuck or oive, but where there's sustained Yiddish dialogue. So this is an example of some of the feature films, and I've put them up just so you can see sort of the variety of places where these films are being produced. Some of the directors are very, very well known, and so on. And then this is an example of a few other places where you can find Yiddish on screen in the last 20 years, prologues to feature films, which you may have seen, and also television and web series. In my extensive investigation into this new Yiddish cinema, I have found 2 main transvernacular strategies for the production of subtitled Yiddish dialogue, each with its own distinct mode of linguistic innovation. The first strategy is translation into Yiddish from a script in another language. This can occur at the hands of a single translator, but more often than not, it is a collective effort. In many cases, the accompanying subtitles on screen represent the original script. The actors who perform the Yiddish dialogue come with varying levels of Yiddish knowledge and propensity for accent and delivery. The results are mixed, ranging from absolutely believable and comprehensible Yiddish to gibberish. Here are, and I will now be sharing some examples with you. My first clip is a prologue, or what's known in cinema as a cold open, to the popular American television show West Wing from 2003. This is the first instance of a fully Yiddish scene on television. The scene is set during the Christmas Eve before the episode where one of the show's main characters, Toby Ziegler, receives a surprise visit from his estranged father. The prologue shows his father working for a Jewish crime syndicate, bantering with two mobsters in Yiddish. So I'm now going to play a clip, but apparently for copyright reasons, because this is happening in Canada, you won't be able to see the image, you'll only hear the dialogue. But you have to imagine three mobster type men sitting in a car. So I'm going to share this with you now.
Was für ein Mensch hat Namen Cole? Und was für ein Mensch hat Namen Sandy? Das ist meine Frage zu dir.
Du kannst uns stellen ein Radio, ja?
Ich will es anstellen, wenn Geld hebt, dann rauszufallen. Der Herr ist, was ich habe gesagt.
Ja. Lester, Cole Porter ist ein berühmter amerikanischer Schreiber von Leder. Man spielt ihn auf dem Radio und auch auf dem Broadway. Und Cole Porter hat gesungen in einer Gruppe in seiner Universität. Aber es hat er Namen, was ich kann nicht sagen.
Du sagst es nicht.
All right, so that's just a really quick audio clip of that prologue. This is seen as an example of what Dror Abin David identifies as a non-translation. The subtitles translate naturally, where the subtitles translate naturally spoken, where the subtitles don't translate naturally spoken dialogue, but rather accompany dialogue that was always intended to be reconstituted via another language. In other words, this is an unnatural kind of translation process. The Yiddish has no actual natural listeners, but rather exists for the sake of authenticity or artistic vision. Scholar Carol O'Sullivan, who termed this kind of reverse translation pseudo-subtitling in her 2011 study Translating Popular Film, suggests that this mode is found in lesser spoken and invented languages, most famously in the 2004 blockbuster hit The Passion of the Christ, which includes a lot of dialogue in Aramaic. As Ella Shohat and Robert Stams famously argued in their 1985 study, Cinema Babel, Language Difference Power, screen dialogue in non-hegemonic languages like Yiddish can function to shift the basis of power within linguistic hierarchies. Likewise, speaking in Yiddish drastically alters the way in which we tell our stories. Other examples of reverse translation in subtitled Yiddish prologues to mainstream American cinema can be found in the films A Serious Man and the Cobbler. Here is a really short television prologue starring the dynamic Tova Feldshuh in the comedy series Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. So again, for copyright reasons, you're just going to have to imagine what's happening and I'll describe it to you, but we're going to have to just share the audio together today. In this dramedy episode, the main character, Rebecca Bunch, is visited by her Jewish mother, capital J, capital M, so a stereotype Jewish mother, played by Feldshuh. The 1-minute prologue shows their ancestors in a kind of dysfunctional Jewish mother-daughter origin story. Again, here you can hear the lines have been translated and memorized, but the comprehensibility is much improved. So here I'm going to play you this short scene and you're just going to hear it. Okay, that's the long clip. I'm just going to try this again. Here we go.
Aber hast nicht gekannt, euch kämen doch hoch?
Wir haben sich ein bisschen gejagt. Nu, Mama, welcher Mal bekommen dem Garfinkelring?
Hast es noch nicht verdient. Und deine Finger sind so grablach.
I'm going to pause here. It's a little tricky without the visuals, but what you're seeing or what you are imagining here is the ancestors are sitting on a ship coming to America. And at issue here is a ring that the daughter really wants to inherit from her mother that basically shows that she has attained some kind of maturity and equality in the family. And this is sort of an ongoing item throughout the series that sort of gives worth to the main character. So this scene is a really pivotal moment in the entire series, and it happens entirely in Yiddish. If you were listening, you could hear that Tova Feldshuh's delivery is quite natural and comprehensible Yiddish, but you can still hear that it's something she's memorized. She's not a native speaker. Rachel Bloom, who is the other character, who's a very well-known television persona in her own right, you can hear that she's memorized this dialogue. Some of her words are a little bit flubbed. Sometimes her stresses are a little bit off. So you can see that they've gone through a lot of effort to try and make this scene authentic and have these two actresses memorize this dialogue that someone has translated from an original English script. So these prologues amount to freestanding mini-films that are entirely in Yiddish. They are located in an American immigrant past, with the main body of the film or television show in English, addressing the ambivalent identities of Americanized Jews in more recent times. A Serious Man, the most famous of the Yiddish mini-films, offers a kind of ideal translation situation. Here, Alan Lewis Rickman, a seasoned actor from the Yiddish theater, won the role and retranslated the Yiddish script he was given into a highly idiomatic language. He played the part across from Yiddish actress and his real-life wife, Yelena Schmolenson. You can hear the idiomatic Yiddish and natural delivery in this spooky scene, where a shtetl couple are visited by a man who may or may not be a dibuk. So I'm going to play. This one should work because it's YouTube. So I'm just going to share this with you. So this is near the end when it gets very spooky.
Hey, Welle! Was war am Eimerstein? Was hast du getan? Ja, was hast du getan? Ich frage dich, Welle, also wie dein Kopf ist auf einen Ort. Hat der Dibuk mich gehabt oder sie gehabt?
No, was sagst du jetzt wegen Schädem? Ha? Es hat ihm gar nicht geschadet.
Verkehrt. Ich fühl nicht, dass geht. Hey, Welle. Ein Mensch tut dir eine Mitzwe und also bedankst du ihm.
So this is, in my estimation, the most successful of the Yiddish dialogue prologues. You can hear how natural the delivery is. And of course, Feiva Schwenkel is a seasoned actor in the Yiddish theater who was an actor for about 80 years. So this is what happens when you hand an English language script to professional Yiddish theater people and have them render it into a prologue. In contrast, while the effort in The West Wing is appreciated as a first attempt, the scene is difficult to discern without the accompanying English subtitles. A notable example of this non-translation approach is the Canadian full-length feature film Die Spielke, or The Pin, which is almost entirely in Yiddish. Telling the story of two young lovers united and then separated during the Holocaust, it was written in English by a non-Yiddish speaking director, Naomi J., and then translated by York University Yiddish instructor, Gloria Brummer. I'm going to show you a very short clip of the official trailer, which is unusual in that it explicitly reveals that the film is going to be in a subtitled Yiddish.
Ich werde ertrunken. Es ist allemal derselbe Cholm. Du musst mir zusagen. Als ich will sterben, wirst du mir geben einen Stock in der Hand mit der Spielke. Edeman bekommt mich.
So if you haven't seen this film, it's a really compelling and absolutely beautiful film. And one of the questions that comes up is, why is this film in Klal Yiddish. So you could hear there's no discernible dialect. The film was deliberately rendered into Klal Yiddish, standard Yiddish, as a way of underlining the universality of its themes. So directors and filmmakers and translators can make decisions about what kind of accent they're going to use, whether you're going to use Klal or situate something in a particular geographic location. In contrast, is the 2008 film by Danny Rosenberg called Homeland or Beit Avi, which began as a school film project and then went on to the International Film Festival circuit. The dialogue for this film was translated by pre-war Lodz Yiddish writer and translator Moshe Shachar into his native dialect of Lodzer Yiddish. So both of these films had non-Yiddish speaking actors memorizing their parts with a great deal of dialogue coaching. And this dialogue coaching is sometimes 5-6 hours a day for months and months on end, very intensively. A third example of this method is another student film, the 2018 short film Shechita, which was also a Toronto film by Israel-born filmmaker Dean Gold, which was translated by Toronto Yiddish poet and translator Hinda Nosik Abelson. In translating this tale of two conflicting Hasidic worldviews, Abelson prioritized producing a volkstimmlich, or more popular Yiddish dialogue based on her native Ukrainian dialect. So I'm just going to show you, play you a very short clip of this so you can hear what the delivery and what the dialogue sounds like.
Sag mal, was wir haben dort erreicht. Unsere eigenen Bücher, Kleider, kuschelig Essen. Das erste Mal in unserer Geschichte können wir öffentlich sagen. Und das ist nicht Trotz, nur Davke. Zu lieb unserer Aktiones. Ich will es nicht losen zerstört werden. Zu lieber bald Schuves Levies. Ich will nicht erleben, einander verloren.
So in this film, you can hear the fluent delivery and compelling dialogue of the two stars, and you might recognize Avi Hoffman as one of the leads. So he is a very seasoned Yiddish actor from the Yiddish theater. And so this film was able to have a lot more Yiddish dialogue, relatively speaking, than some of the other films that I've been sharing with you. All of the films I've discussed up to this point have minimized dialogue and long moments of cinematic splendor. So sometimes 10-15 minutes of beautiful landscapes with absolutely no dialogue at all. Carol O'Sullivan calls this visual storytelling because the translation and coaching processes are so laborious for creating Yiddish dialogue, especially in films that are primarily in the language. Thus, A Serious Man and Shechita, which are markedly shorter and starred professional actors from the Yiddish stage, contain relatively more spoken dialogue than The Pin, where every line had to be memorized phonetically by the film's two young stars, neither of whom spoke any Yiddish. It is worth noting here that not a single filmmaker has made a second Yiddish dialogue film. The success of this form of professionalized film translation relies on academics or artists who are fluent in Yiddish and actors who are willing to learn the accent and memorize the dialogue. Most of all, it requires directors who value the integrity of Yiddish and are willing to go far above and beyond using Google Translate. It is significantly aided when the translators and actors have a direct link to the traditional speakers of Yiddish. But what does the future hold as this link becomes more tenuous? And here I come to my second strategy. This strategy draws not on the population of native speakers within the Haredi world. This second strategy draws not on the population of native speakers within the Haredi world, specifically it's 1:30 in the morning. I'm going to try that again. The second strategy draws on the population of native speakers within the Haredi world, specifically Hasidim who have left the fold or are on the margins. This approach is most often used in cinema that tells the stories of Hasidim who are off the derech or are questioning their Hasidic identities. And here are a few titles: Mendy, Romeo and Juliet in Yiddish, Felix et Meira, Unorthodox. In some cases, this strategy has been to hire an actor or actors who had themselves left the Hasidic world as well as coach actors with no Yiddish background. For example, in the 2015 film Felix et Meira, Loser Twersky, a former Chassid, not only played a main part, but coached the Israeli star Hadass Yaron, who played Meira. Haredim remain fascinating to filmmakers who tell their stories from their own vantage point. Having Hasidic Yiddish spoken adds authenticity, but does not necessarily allow Haredim to tell their own stories. Most recently, in the 2017 full-length Yiddish language film Menashe, a new strategy emerged: the creation of the Yiddish dialogue in a process of guided improvisation under the watchful eye of the director, Joshua Z. Weinstein, with the scenes featuring non-professional Hasidic actors. And I'm going to play you now an endearing scene with the main character Menashe and his son Reuven, the one he is struggling to maintain custody of after the sudden death of his wife. I'm going to show you a short clip of this, and then I'll do a little bit of analysis of it.
Was hat man gelernt nach Heide Hand?
Wir haben sich gelernt wegen Teut und ja so. Da.
Was wegen Besachayim?
Ja, also man darf sein dort bekommelig, man darf nicht essen dort, man darf nicht trinken dort und man darf nicht machen kein Business dort.
Man lernt freiliche Sachen. Ich habe gelernt, ich die letzte Woche in der Perkurs. Das sei ja jeder, wenn Timer sucht. Stark bei sich, so wie ein Lampert. Was ist ein Lampert? Was ist ein Lampert?
So you can see how charming and spontaneous that scene is. And that is possible partly because it was a scene that was improvised. There are definitely advantages and disadvantages to this second method. On the plus side, the dialogue is authentically in a Hasidic accent and has the spontaneity that is lacking in some of the other titles that I mentioned. It also encourages the telling of stories by members of the community. However, the process is laborious. Each scene requires intensive setup as an improvisation scene because there's no set script, and repeated takes of the same scene are impossible. There are also some parts that can't be filled in this way. For example, there are no Hasidic child actors. So Menashe starred a native speaker from the secular world, Ruben Naborsky, who plays Reuven. In addition to the authentic Yiddish dialogue in this film, the narrative is based on the real-life experiences of its titular character, played by Menashe Lustig, who also consulted on the dialogue. He has since gone on to other film roles, for example, the absolutely terrifying English-Yiddish 2019 horror movie The Vigil, which I will not share with you, but encourage you to watch if you like to watch a really scary film. A painstaking hybrid version of these approaches was used in the 2020 miniseries Unorthodox, where authenticity was of paramount importance to the creators and director, Maria Schrader, in this narrative of a Hasidic woman leaving her Borough Park community for a new life in Berlin. Here is a very short clip from the trailer where you can hear the Hasidic Yiddish in this series.
Der Schatchen hat ungetrogen Emetsen.
Was für ein Bucher ist er?
Ihr ist wie jeden einen, gehörig.
Ich bin anders wie die anderen Mädchen.
Antraschiski.
All right, so that was just a really quick clip for you to hear a little bit of the Yiddish. Lily Rosen, at the time Eli Rosen, who grew up in Borough Park and came with extensive experience in the New York Yiddish theater, was hired to write and consult on all aspects of Haredi representation, as well as play the character of the Rebbe. Rosen, who translated all of the scenes into Yiddish, was occasionally able to improvise with the Yiddish-speaking actors, who had been recruited from the New York Yiddish theater. Others, including Shira Haas as the main character of Etsy, had to be coached daily over a period of many months. Rosenwood was able to steer the miniseries in line with her experiences of the Hasidic world in an adaptation of Deborah Feldman's memoir about leaving the fold. However, to date, Menashe remains the only mainstream film narrative that tells the story from within the community rather than from the outside. And this brings my quick dive into Yiddish screen translation to a close. But what are the takeaways? First, linguistic innovation is taking place on screen via Yiddish dialogue to various effect. Whether we like it or not, movies and television are where people are most likely to hear Yiddish today, even if they're relying on subtitles. Second, the number of productions with Yiddish dialogue are increasing as major funding bodies like Netflix are realizing that there are audiences for subtitled Yiddish dialogue on screen. Third, a sizable body of research shows that people learn languages by watching subtitled cinema. Yiddish learners are adept at accessing a variety of new media, notably Duolingo. This suggests that the Yiddish heard on screen is doubly significant to the future of the language. Fourth, there is no one best way to produce Yiddish dialogue on screen. No matter what process a creator uses, it will be tremendously time-consuming, and the actors may still flub their lines. Finally, and this is the motivational part of my speech, if this speaks to you, seize the opportunities to create Yiddish dialogue on screen. Why not? When the lines between researchers, teachers, and cultural producers are so blurred in the Yiddish world already. Here I point to Michal Yashinsky's amazing series of Yiddish Alive shorts. I am a huge fan. We are sorely missing women's and queer voices on the Yiddish screen. Tell your stories in Yiddish. Make your own fiction film and post it on YouTube. Just be sure to tell me so that I can add it to my collection. Ashenim Dak.
Thank you so much, Professor Margolis. It's so fantastic. And I'd like to welcome now Dr. Nove to present.
Thank you. I'm just going to take a couple seconds here to share my screen. Okay, is this good for everyone? Okay. Oh, no. Okay. Okay, there we go. So thank you, Anna, Rivke, Miriam, Rivke, that was fascinating, the conference organizers, and all of you who are joining us today. It's really an honor and a pleasure for me to be here. So the New York Hasidic community has grown tremendously since its founding population arrived, and this growth has been accompanied by a surge in cultural confidence and group pride. Additionally, out of the shared experiences, languages, and references of these native New Yorkers, a distinctly American Hasidic culture has emerged. The past 3 decades have seen enormous activity in the realm of Hasidic pop culture, fueled by creative energy and aided by new technologies that have made production cheaper and more efficient. New York Hasidim have produced a robust canon of artifacts and expressions for popular consumption, including theatrical performances, lyrical music, literature, comedy, commercial marketing, games, and more, all with Hasidic Yiddish as the medium. In these genres, the tension between traditionalism and modernity is apparent, as mainstream American trends are rendered, refracted, and refitted onto traditional content to form a distinctly Hasidic style. At the same time, the Yiddish spoken by Hasidim has been undergoing a transformation of its own. And while our knowledge of Hasidic Yiddish lags far behind our understanding of Hasidim as a social group, recent studies show a high degree of linguistic variability and innovation at all levels of the language. And I've given a partial list on the slide. So this topic is a departure from my usual research agenda, which centers on variation and change in everyday Hasidic Yiddish. So pop culture artifacts in the spoken or written mode are fictional, scripted, and performed. And language choice is for the most part an intentional top-down process. For this reason, an analysis of Yiddish in Hasidic pop culture reveals more about the genre and the culture than the state of the language in the community. Nevertheless, given its cultural reach and penetration, I believe that the linguistic community can also benefit from a careful study of Hasidic pop culture. What I offer today is a very preliminary overview. Can somebody just tell me if my slides are okay? I just want to pause for a second. Is everything showing okay? Yeah, okay. So let's start with children's literature. Comics and graphic novels are a recent addition to the popular Hasidic literary canon. The first Yiddish comic books created by Israeli writer and illustrator Shifra Glick were published in the mid-2000s, and Hasidic children were immediately hooked. More visual literature quickly followed, and the market is now flooded with graphic reading material. This trend actually coincides with the visual turn in literature in mainstream society, which was influenced by manga, multitasking culture, and multimedia consumption, among other things. So written language is always more resistant to change, and the Hasidic writing system differs from the spoken register in some very specific ways. For example, the written language uses the formal first-person plural form of mead in the nominative, unlike the spoken system, which has ins, and id eich in the second-person plural, where the spoken Yiddish has etz ink or ink, depending on the generation of the speaker. Articles are also marked for gender and case, although this is often highly inconsistent, whereas these markings are nearly always absent in speech. Additionally, most of the Yiddish words that are typically replaced by their English equivalents in speech are preserved in the written form, even in literature geared for children. On the other hand, the proliferation of dialogue-based graphic publications has made room for a new kind of syncretic writing, one that supposedly mirrors speech and can thus theoretically include the kinds of code switches and novel expressions that are in use among Hasidic speakers. So this sample is from a new graphic novel, Der Bund mit den Piraten. The story builds upon historical accounts of Sephardic Jews from Iberia in the early modern period who became pirates and raided Spanish silver ships returning from the New World. There's even a Jewish papagay. He doesn't swear, obviously. So the preface of the book cautions readers not to judge these Jews for the fighting and the killing and the stealing, plundering, since they didn't have access to rabbinic authorities who could advise them. The book, though, is endorsed by a rabbinic authority, so there's that. Subject-wise, visually, and in almost every other way, this book is a far cry from the reading material that I had as a child. The graphics are very much like secular pirate comic books, with some notable exceptions. For example, the sexy pirate woman is not there. There are a number of mainstream cultural references, as you can see on the slide. Regarding the language, there's an obvious influence from English, as shown by the examples on this slide. And the pronouns are the informal ones that are used in speech. But the more salient features of the vernacular, the usual borrowings that are everywhere in the language, and most of the slang, are missing. And the Yiddish overall is a very conservative Yiddish. And I'll pause for just a couple of seconds while you take a look at these examples. Theatrical performances, Hasidim call them spielen or plays, are not a new phenomenon in the Hasidic world. However, they've been taken to a whole new level in contemporary culture. The genre exploded in the mid-aughts with the Inten shows, a series of plays with the word Inten in the title, produced by Steinhaus Productions. These plays are performed on Chalamoid, the interim days of Pesach or Sukkot, after which professional recordings are available for purchase on DVD and online streaming. So the companies rely on mass attendance in order to be profitable because the runtime is really short. And part of the reason they're always sold out is because the creators solicit endorsements from an assortment of Hasidic leaders and educators. But in return, they agree to adhere to certain guidelines. It's no wonder then that these shows are devoid of anything that could be construed as inappropriate by the community, including references to women, mild profanity, extreme violence, None of that. In every other way, they've become extremely modern and sophisticated. The costumes, the stage elements, the special effects, the musical accompaniment, all are super elaborate and high tech. So the example I want to show is an excerpt from a film that has the word fiddle in the title. You'll see the opening credits fading to reveal the silhouette of a fiddler, his back to the audience. Next, the main character delivers a philosophical soliloquy, and this is followed by a number in which a poor man bemoans his fate. Does it sound familiar? No. I'm actually not talking about Fiddler auf dem Dach or Fiddler on the Roof. I'm referring to a recent Hasidic play, Ibn Fiedel, which I viewed on DVD. The film is also subtitled in English, which I believe is a new development, speaking of subtitles. Set in the 19th century Bavaria, Ibn Fiedel tells an elaborate tale of two child prodigies who are invited to sing at a Christian religious ceremony, but they refuse to oblige. Trouble ensues, and at the center of it all is a Stradivarius violin, which is the fiddle in the title. So I'm going to play a bit of the intro just to illustrate the similarity to modern films, and so you can get a sense of the level of professionalism. And here is the opening scene with a visual and structural intertextuality that I alluded to earlier.
Hey, de Welt. Ich darf auch sagen, ihr weißt doch auch, es sind verschiedene Menschen, verschiedene Geschehnisse, verschiedene Umstände, in verschiedene Wegen, wie man kann klicken auf jede Geschehnis.
As you can see, the language is pretty formal and stylized. And I'm not going to play the poor man's song, but I'm going to play a portion of where he ruminates with his friend about the life of the rich.
Ich rijd mich nicht auf, wenn ich rechtsmensch. Ist gleichen, aber nicht als ich rechtsmensch. Ein Tod zusammen. Ein Achtermann. Dann alten Pisma. Ja. Ein Gott. Der Uscher wohnt in einem Palaz. Scheine Möbel, Teier ohne Schatz. Ja. Deckt am Tisch mit einem Teier Tisch, wenn ich sage, bleib mir als ein Tisch, hat nicht kein Lächeln. In er hat ein Sachbetlich, einmal ein Tisch. Was von einem zum zweiten, sieht man sich nicht. Du weißt, wenn man sich raft, eine riesensilberne Lachte hat man. Mit einer riesensilbernen Tatz, man kann auflegen darauf 5 Kinder bei Pidden. Gelijk me zo van een gerechtsnis. Over een gelijke is dat een gerechtsnis. Eindelijk te zijn. Aracherman, ja. In Essen had hij van alle minen alle. Vis, vlees, hering, leber, gallen. In alle minen dips, zo dit ziet er zo zoals kan einer. Hakt die abschiet en drinkt maar een bijna.
So one important way that this scene diverges from Tevye's If I Were a Rich Man is that Sudik, the poor man, makes it clear that he, unlike Tevye, has no argument with God. Additionally, while the story takes place more than 200 years ago, the description of the spread on the wealthy man's table is based on modern food trends. They mention dips, yapchik, marachbeiner, and charcuterie later on. These trends reflect the rise in materialism in the Hasidic world, where Kedaishim, the plural of Kiddush, have become ever more elaborate, and every simcha needs to have a charcuterie board and all the modern foods. And while the language is slightly less stylized than the soliloquy that we heard earlier, and actually includes some of the vernacular expressions such as hakt yapchik, like he devours large quantities of yapchik, the language overall is conservative. So moving on, original lyrical music in mainstream Hasidic Yiddish only arrived on the Jewish music scene in the 1990s, most notably through the songs of Lipa Schmelzid, Michul Schnitzlid, and later Matti Ilovich. Their songs contain lighthearted reflections on everyday life, and they were a breath of fresh air to Hasidim. In recent years, Hasidic music production has become increasingly advanced. New releases are often accompanied by high-tech cinematography that is culturally specific, but is marked by mainstream entertainment influences. Success in the music industry, unlike theater business, doesn't hinge on attracting large crowds, and Hasidic artists do not seek approval from authorities. So there is more freedom to deviate from social norms, and still even here the Yiddish is relatively conservative. To illustrate, I'm going to show a part of a music video by Matti Ilovich entitled Lail Shishi. And just as a little background, Lail Shishi refers to Thursday night, when it's customary for some ultra-Orthodox Jews to study Torah well into the night in preparation for Shabbos. Among more laid-back Hasidim who are not inclined towards learning, this tradition has been totally appropriated, and Lail Shishi has become a time to hang out with friends, eat shulent and kigel, and just chill. A couple of years ago, just a few blocks from where I live in Muncie, an old non-kosher establishment called Ralphie's Diner closed, and it was quickly replaced by a new eatery named, wait for it, Lail Shishi. And here's the song.
Auf den Schabes, dich vermegen in mir Megen, fragen, wegen, denk, Travis, der Kabel Schabes, mein Ehre, was mir. Das sind eindeutige Zweiten, wie den Weiten, den Begleiten, den Begleiten, den Verspreiten, auf die Sana Galashem, bringt Möpsen, so was Schulzen, nimmer weg, will die. Bewahrt schön, was noch war, nimmer mit der Gules, ja.
Okay, that was a bit long, but so the material element of Hasidic culture that I mentioned before is reflected everywhere in pop culture. And these enticing images of food known as food porn in mainstream English are ubiquitous. This video, which ostensibly elevates the learning element of Lail Shishi, is a good example of the glamorization of what I call, if you'll excuse my language, fres culture. Aside from a morphologically integrated token of the English invite, mit begleiten and inviting, there is no sign of the borrowing that is everywhere in the vernacular. At the end, Ilovich pays homage to an old song, Wenn ich wollt gehabt koyach, composed by Rabbi Aaron Kadlina as a way of linking the present to the past. So, in conclusion, we've seen that while Hasidic pop culture is very much in conversation with mainstream culture, borrowing its structures, forms, and styles, the language does not exactly reflect the innovations that are seen in the vernacular. Rather, it seems to represent a sort of intermediate register between written Yiddish and the spoken dialect. So let's discuss what that might mean. Oops. American Hasidim have been the focus of sociological scrutiny almost since their arrival to this country, and this fascination has certainly not faded over time. Interest in this group comes in part from the fact that Hasidim have resisted assimilation and preserved a lifestyle based on rigorous observance of traditional Jewish law. But it's not simply their behavior that makes them stand out in secular society. With their distinctive dress and their use of Yiddish as an everyday vernacular, Hasidim are far more visible than other religious Jews. And these conspicuous aspects of Hasidic culture, which seem to belong to a different time and place, also contribute to the view that it's utterly resistant to change. But how fixed is Hasidic culture really? Nearly every study concludes that despite outward appearances, Hasidim are actually quite American. And in fact, their values and social behaviors may be more similar to the mores of modern society than to the Hasidim of yore. This suggests that Hasidim are not quite as disconnected from secular society as even they imagine themselves to be. The question is, how are symbolic borders breached? How do the cultural parameters of a society that tells itself it's unchanging and feels detached from secular culture actually expand in tandem with it? And finally, how does Hasidic culture reinvent itself without losing its distinctiveness? In her book, Jewish Life and American Culture, Sylvia Barak Fishman describes how the process of coalescence, linking old with new, plays a crucial role in the construction of modern American Jewish identity. Fishman explains that rather than assimilating completely, American Jews reinterpret liberal ideologies through the lens of their religious heritage. However, Fishman's comment about ultra-Orthodox Jews and coalescence is that they simply don't do it. The ultra-Orthodox response to modernization, according to Fishman, is to dig in their collective heels, reseal the communal boundaries, and just forge ahead with their traditional life. And Fishman is not alone in this view. Haredi society is commonly portrayed in secular media representations this way, for example. However, Yoel Finkelman, who analyzed Haredi literature, recognizes this fallacy, and he describes how coalescence is indeed operationalized to make aspects of modern culture acceptable to an ultra-Orthodox readership. In this way, Finkelman argues, the mores of Hasidic Jews increasingly come to resemble those of the surrounding culture. This process of syncretism, of pairing the novel with the familiar, operates at all levels of Haredi and Hasidic life, including popular culture. In a recent study describing how the music of Israeli pop star Ishai Ribo moved into the Hasidic mainstream, Weinberg and Dale argue that Ribo's public collaboration with Hasidic singer Mati Steinmetz facilitated this crossover, and that appearing alongside Steinmetz diminished the sense of otherness and allowed Ribo's music to be embraced by Hasidim who typically don't listen to Israeli pop. So I suggest that Yiddish plays a similar role in Hasidic pop culture. In this rapidly changing realm, language is one of the constants, helping to make the unfamiliar recognizable. The semi-formal register of Hasidic pop culture lends a traditional veneer to novel content, making it palatable to a broader Hasidic public. In this way, artists and producers can bypass some of the restrictions designed to keep the modern world at bay. Now, I'm not arguing that Yiddish is the only method through which this is accomplished. I mean, the Hasidic resistance to secular Yiddish literature and music makes it clear that language alone is not sufficient to make something okay. Rather, through a combination of carefully curated content that always includes a moral message, a religious reference, a historical connection, delivered in a traditional Yiddish, new ideas can gradually be introduced. And in this way, the definition of what Hasidic culture is, of what it can be, can keep expanding. Thank you all. And I also want to thank the wonderful people who provided me with access, information, inspiration, and insights for this talk.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nove, for this, and Professor Margolis for these truly fascinating talks. There is so much to discuss here and so much to think about. So I wish to first remind our audience that now we will move on to a period of about 15 minutes, maybe less, of facilitated conversation before moving on to the Q&A that will open to our wider audience. So if you haven't already, you're welcome to ask questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them soon. I see we already have a really interesting question there. If you like to share your name and institutional affiliation, we can read them out loud as well. So, okay, so much to delve into. I want to start, as Professor Margolis noted when discussing linguistic innovation at the intersection, your talks presented a very different context for new linguistic production in Yiddish between this new Ashkenaz context and the Hasidic or Haredi context. Yet, thanks to the new media and its accessibility, this polarization isn't as definitive as it used to be, and I think it's really interesting to think about that. So between your talks, we see a distinction between an inside and an outside perspective. In Professor Nove's talk, we saw cultural products from a society that tells itself, which I love that definition. And in Professor Margolis' presentation, we saw examples for narratives that are told about that society mostly. So my first question for both of you is about the option or possibility for future Farbindungen, for future connections and collaborations between the new Ashkenaz and Hasidic cultures. So if we take the case that we just finished with the collaboration between the Israeli Orthodox singer Ishai Ribo and the Hasidic singer Moti Steinmetz, can something like this happen in the North American context? Is it happening today already? And can this collaboration take place in Yiddish? So this question is addressed to both of you, and please.
Chaya, do you want to go ahead?
Maybe you start.
So I think these kinds of collaborations are really unavoidable. And I think a lot of it is because there are people on the margins of these two communities who are sort of cross-fertilizing. So there are, Haredim who are either off the derech or who are sort of peripheral to the Haredi community, who are bridging those gaps a little bit. And they're the ones, I think, who are bringing in some of the innovation, particularly in my area of interest, which is secular cinema. So my research doesn't deal with Haredi produced cinema, but there is an example of one Haredi crossover film that I didn't talk about, which is called A Geschäft, which was actually produced by the Haredi community for the Haredi community, and it was banned by the Rebbes very publicly and shut down. But it looks like those barriers are being pushed a little bit now, and I anticipate a Haredi-made film that will go somewhat more mainstream in the near future. I think it's an inevitability because of these crossovers. Also because Haredim, like all people, don't always produce culture for the betterment of humanity. They also produce it because it's a commercial enterprise. So Haredi singers make money, Haredi actors make money. It's a career path for people who are really talented. So I think this kind of crossover activity is kind of an inevitability as that becomes more and more accepted as a profession. And I think that the secular world is more open to this cross-fertilization as well, because as I mentioned, there's this niche market that's really interested in hearing those stories. And I'm hoping that more and more of them get told by the insiders to that community as consultants like Lily Rosen are brought in, and other people who are not just gazing at the Haredi world, but have a vested interest in portraying it with some accuracy and affection.
Yeah, so that's a really, I think that's a really good assessment. And I agree that it's inevitable. And I also think that as people are accessing these materials from different media and exposure happens online and all, this type of cross-fertilization is inevitable. I'm glad you mentioned the film A Geschäft, which I actually didn't know about till I read your piece in Gewebe about it. because I wasn't into the controversy. So, well, I'll backtrack for a second. I wanted to talk in this talk when I was first preparing. I really wanted to also mention productions that are done sort of by Hasidim on the margins. So I'm not even talking about those who have left the fold, but those who exist somewhere in the in-between. So this is, some people draw a distinction between pop culture and popular culture, right? Where pop culture is sort of this top-down commercial a genre, and popular culture is those the stuff that's produced by the general population. So I think the stuff that's coming out by Hasidim on the margins is more about popular culture. And what's really interesting to me in terms of the language is that in those productions, the vernacular is all over the place. And so the language is reflecting kind of the way people talk. So there is still some borders between those. Another interesting thing, and I'm just trying to connect a bunch of ideas here, is that producers, even the mainstream Hasidic artists, actors, all of them are not Hasidim in the center of society in terms of conservatism, religiosity, and even in like status, right? So unlike in the secular world, actors don't have high status. It's actually not something most people want to do. Like if you're studying Torah all day, like, wow, we look up to you. If you're an actor, it's like, so all these, but everybody's consuming these media, right? And so it's the people who are going out and who are talking to people on both sides, who are bringing these influences in. And so for all these reasons, I think that these Farbindungen are inevitable. Also because things are changing so quickly in the Hasidic community, as it is in the world. Another interesting topic that I couldn't touch upon is like what's happening with women in cultural production. And it's absolutely crazy how much has changed in just the past 5 years, where now you can find Haredi, not so much yet. I mean, Hasidic women are doing amazing things in cultural production, but they're not doing so very publicly yet. However, so just to tie this all together, I do think there is something about too much too soon, which is kind of where the line is. And I think Agasheft was that too much too soon thing. Whereas now I think people would not really blink, but this was what, 2005? It was early days, and I think the Olam was just not ready for it. So I think everything has to happen in increments. So whatever those connections will be, it will be subtle, and it will be through this kind of, yes, a very gradual coalescence. It's like, we're keeping everything. And another thing that I've noticed that I didn't really have time to talk about is like this new trend in kind of a vintage approach. And I showed the image in the beginning at the end of a new music video, Yidden in America, which has this like vintage visuals of like old American. So I think Hasidic producers, what they're doing now is, as they're bringing new material in, they keep reinforcing the narrative of like, we're still the same old, we're connected to the past, we're not going away from that. And that just kind of helps.
Thank you so much, both of you. You're painting such an interesting future for the connections that might arise and also the changes that we're still waiting to see. Chaya, if you can expand on this role of women, I think it's fascinating. Also, there's one question in the chat about it, but I know that in Israel, there's a lot of groups of Haredi women who are doing theatrical performances. There are groups written by women, produced by women, directed by women, and for an audience of women. So I was wondering if something like this also exists in the Hasidic in New York, and also will it allow more linguistic innovation because it is not as tightly supervised by men or rabbinic forces. And it ties with the question by Sora Biskowitz, who wrote, "Hi, Chaya, can you talk about Hasidic cultural materials produced by and for women? Are materials produced for mixed audience by both men and women, or are materials gender segregated?" So I think there is a lot of interest here about that.
Yes, I'm writing an essay for an edited volume right now, and when I first started, I wanted to talk about women cultural production, and I ended up doing the most horrible cliche thing and putting it in a footnote. I'm just gonna say, start with a disclaimer that I'm not the expert on Hasidic female cultural production. There is a forthcoming book by Jessica Rhoda that is going to be, I think, like a lot of groundbreaking research, just focusing on that. And literally every woman in the Hasidic community that I spoke about as I was researching this had spoken to Jessica about for her research. So I think there's good stuff. Rose Waldman also published a piece about female cultural production. What I will say from the little that I have researched and found out is that so like I said, in the past 5 years, there's been a radical move towards women taking control of some of these genres. Now, of course, they cannot be the public face because the halachic prohibition against the voice of women is still very much something that people follow. But in women-only spaces, this production has really exploded. I interviewed a woman in Kiryas Yoel in Monroe who has her own studio and produces music for women, for private, for public performances. I mean, women have always performed in public just for women-only audiences. But what was interesting to me is that Haredi women have moved into public spaces on the internet and started creating these large shows. So I think this is going somewhere, and everybody that I spoke to said it's going somewhere. Hasidic women are still gathering their courage to be a little bit more public about what they're doing. And I had some interesting conversations with male producers who are interested in doing collaborations with women. I mean, women are already and have always been working behind the scenes in composition, in event planning and things like that. But I spoke to somebody who said, I'm really interested in doing a partnership where we can do the exact same things for women and for men. So I think things are happening there.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm gonna ask one last question to Professor Margolis, and then we'll open up to the Q&A. So please write us your questions. So Professor Margolis, when we talk about the future of this new Yiddish cinema, I was wondering if you can expand or address the question, should we question the motivation of the audience? And how does the representation of Yiddish on screen is affected by the perception of Haredi or Hasidic society as maybe exotic or as the other? So I was wondering if there's anything we can think about that.
I think that up to this point, the way that Yiddish has primarily been used on screen, and this is in mainstream cinema, so independent filmmaking at film festivals, Hollywood, is as a way of creating a sense of otherness and making the viewer feel profoundly disconnected. So it's designed for us not to comprehend the dialogue. It's not designed for the few Yiddish speakers in any given audience. And when the filmmakers talk about why they've chosen to put Yiddish into their creations, it's generally because they want to create a sense of estrangement or discomfort among the viewers. They're dealing with a difficult political topic like the Jewish experience during the Holocaust in Poland. So Polish filmmakers will use Yiddish to sort of undermine and question the way that's being represented. Yiddish is also used as a way of forcing this authenticity that so many filmmakers really strive for. But as a general rule, the filmmakers don't know any Yiddish and they don't learn any Yiddish in the process. So sometimes the filmmakers will be interested in Yiddish once the project is complete, but they generally go into the process with no Yiddish whatsoever, and stay that way throughout the duration and rely on translators to provide the Yiddish that they would like to see in the production. So it's not a judgment. Filmmakers are busy people, but it means that the Yiddish that you get and the delivery of the Yiddish and the way that the Yiddish functions is profoundly othered and othering. And it's designed to make the viewer feel disconnected from the production. Interestingly, with the exception of Yidlife Crisis, the web series, none of the Yiddish material for screen is funny. It's not intended to make us laugh, which is very different from the way Yiddish appears in American television, which is another project that I'm working on and a separate topic. So as soon as Yiddish appears in full spoken dialogue, it's not funny. And that's partly because it's very hard to be funny in a language that people don't speak. So if a filmmaker, for example, puts the prologue to A Serious Man, which is a hilariously funny movie, the prologue is not funny. There's no moment to laugh in the prologue. The prologue for The Cobbler, which is another comedy, also the prologue is not funny. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend prologue on the ship, kind of amusing, but not funny the way the show is funny. So there's a very particular orientation towards drama, which is a break from the way that Yiddish has been perceived. And for example, when the film Homeland was screened in Israel in 2009, which looks at the experience of Holocaust survivors in Israel and the way that they've had to sort of forget their culture as part of the transition, audiences laughed when the film began. And then the filmmaker, Danny Rosenberg, said, and then they stopped laughing. That was pretty much right away. People expected laughter and they didn't get it. So there's also this real break of how Yiddish has been perceived, and Yiddish really occurring really in the context of drama and serious films that question the history of different societies, that question our perceptions, that deal with really difficult, meaty issues that have to do with identity and memory.
Thank you. This is really, really interesting. Okay, we are going to open it for our audience and hear some other voices. So you can see in the Q&A, we have a couple of questions. Let's start with William Pimla. Thank you for the fascinating talks. I wanted to ask about the Americanness of American Hasidic culture. Do you have any views about how it differs from British and Israeli Hasidic culture? So I think this one's for you, Chaya.
Yes. I don't have a lot to say because I haven't done any comparative work. I mean, there's some comparative work being done on the language, but not so much. I mean, there hasn't been that much done on pop culture, on Hasidic pop culture in general, and comparative studies, I think, are the next step. I will say that New York is kind of at the center of cultural production, and the stuff that's produced in New York is usually consumed everywhere. I think this is because it's just, I mean, mostly because it's just the largest population, and people are looking towards New York Hasidim for this stuff. There's also a lot happening in Israel, and a lot of collaboration between Israel and New York. But what ends up happening is oftentimes these projects are conceived in New York and then filmed in Israel, either because for the setting, or because it's just more economical to produce it there. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of crossover between New York and Israel. I haven't seen much in other smaller Jewish communities around the world, but who knows, right? As it becomes more accessible, the means of production become more accessible to people, we might see a lot more of that coming out. And that, I mean, I don't really know if I can say more.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking forward to reading those comparative researchers to come, scholarly work to come. Okay, we have another question from Miriam Isaacs. Can someone talk about Mandy and the Golem comic books?
That's I guess she's referring to the Hasidic produced or Haredi produced Mandy and the Golem. So I have seen them, but I haven't studied them. And really, this is my first foray. I'm embarrassed to say how little I know about Hasidic pop culture before I started doing this. I knew nothing. And so I was like the least likely person. I am the least likely person to be doing this because I live in my academic bubble, and my grandkids know way more about this. All of a sudden, like I'm sitting and having conversations with them about Itsy and Pitsy comics, and I say, I know what that is because I've studied it. So this has been like really fascinating to me and connecting me to a lot of different people in different ages. Some of my consultants were very young kids for this project. So I've seen it. I have some pictures on my phone because I started looking at it. I was especially interested in how they, if that's the series that Miriam is referring to, there's some disclaimer about the truth to the veracity of the story, which I thought was very progressive. Like, what do we really know about what's true about the Golem? But I can't say more because I haven't read them or analyzed them. So I read the Jewish Pirates, but I haven't read all the comics.
Okay. And we have a question from Dina Gorelik, sorry. How can new Yiddish films and media push more mainstream American Jewish identity? Does this new art have a life in mainstream culture? Is there a big audience outside of Yiddishists?
I don't think that the audience for the new Yiddish cinema is Yiddishists, but I think that Yiddishists should be making new Yiddish cinema for Yiddishists and for non-Yiddishists. So I think it's, and this is sort of the politicized part of my address and why I was really eager to talk about this subject matter at Farbindungen, because there are so many people involved in the program. It's an amazing program that really spans the academic with the political, the activist, the cultural producer components of Yiddish. So New Yiddish is really well represented on the program for this conference, which is really exciting. And I think that there is a lot that Yiddishists can contribute to what exists for the screen right now in Yiddish, which up to this point hasn't really been produced from that space and that mindset. And I know, for example, when I've shown Yiddish films to students at varying levels, and particularly when I've shown Yid Life Crisis, the response has been, well, why aren't our interests represented? How come nobody has done anything about the activist leftist heritage of Yiddish? And how come no one has looked at the queer stories in Yiddish? And how come those stories haven't been told? And my answer is always, well, somebody's going to tell them. Somebody has to tell them. And ideally someone who's invested in Yiddish. Why don't you do it? So one example for Transparent, the series, there were a lot of opportunities there where there could have been Yiddish, but wasn't. And Inge Webb did a really interesting interview with the creator who said, I didn't feel like I had enough confidence in the language. I didn't feel like I was the person to do that, but I can see now that that would be something interesting to do moving forward. So I think as more cross-fertilization happens between Yiddishists and people who are invested in Yiddish on varying levels and the cultural production that's happening on screen, I think as more of those synergies happen, I think we're going to see a lot more different kinds of stories being told. So really the takeaway here is if that someone approaches you and says, would you be interested in doing translation for a screen project? Someone's looking to hire a translator. If you can make the time, do it. It's fun, it's exciting, you make your mark, and you can also kind of really influence how these stories get told in the future. And I'm quite certain moving forward that more and more people in this Zoom room are going to be asked to participate in projects like this, in addition to you possibly wanting to just, make your own project and tell your own story. And sometimes those things become really mainstream.
Thank you. In a conference about the future of Yiddish, I really think this is a great note to end with this incredible discussion. And I want to pass now the microphone to Sarah, to Sophia, to talk about the rest of the conference. And I want to thank Dr. Nove and Professor Margolis. Thank you so much for being here with us today. This was incredibly rich talks, and I'm really looking forward to read more about that. Thank you so much. Sophia?
Sorry, hello. Yes, thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Anna. Thank you to our captionist. We're going to have a 30-minute break now before our next panel, which will begin at 11. Will be a separate Zoom link in your program. The panel at 11 is Futures at the Crossroads. I highly encourage everyone, I invite you and encourage you to attend as many sessions as you can over the course of the next 2 days. But more importantly, I invite you to join us as we envision the future of Yiddish studies together. So thank you again to everyone who attended today. Thank you again to our panelists. And yes, I look forward to seeing you at the coming sessions.